What's up, everybody? I'm Jason. Welcome back. It is finally here, as evidenced by these boxes. Hey, it's even got an R. Uh, it has been months in the making, or in the coming, or whatever you want to call it. I have been waiting months for this. It is my EOS R5. I wanted to open it on camera and have at it as it is. I've already opened the battery grip, but it is still in the box. But we're going to dive right into the camera here. The EOS R5. So first impressions, well, the box is not an Apple box. It's not a bad box, but Apple does a better job packing things. Also, always a little discouraging to see stuff not quite lined up in the case. Battery, I will be firing this up probably as I record this or while I record this. I'm going to be firing this up on some charged LPE6 N batteries. You know, it's kind of, I mean, it's not poorly packed or anything like that. It's a, you know, it's a camera. It's packed in a box. I think some of Canon's other cameras in past generations have been packed a little bit better. But you know, what is there to say? It's a camera in a box. It does not look like it was harmed in the shipping. Pulling it out, you know, it's pretty, you know, the IS system does the rattle that they tell you it's going to do or could do. So right off the bat, and some of this, of course, is first impressions for me, and some of this, of course, is just stuff that haven't talked about talking about the camera. But right off the bat, I like the fact, and I like this going into it, but as you can see, the viewfinder, the eye cup, does not sit flush with the back of the camera. And this was a feature that I really liked in the EOS 1D and 1DX series. It's probably the only reason that I regret getting rid of my 1D Mark III is as an eyeglass wearer, that gives you the extra nose relief to not have your nose mashed into the back of the sensor, or back of the screen, back of the camera. And I like that. That makes things really a lot more comfortable for me as a user of the camera. I wish Canon, well, Canon because that's who I shoot with, but all companies did that with their DSLRs. Of course, with mirrorless, having a viewfinder that sits back is not a problem because there's no optical path through the camera that you have to deal with. So, you know, that's a thing. Grip-wise, it feels a lot like a 5D Mark IV in terms of grip. I would, well, I would have had a 5D Mark IV sitting on the camera on the table here, but I decided that I was going to throw all my cameras at this in recording this, so I could cut between stuff and have different views and whatnot. But you know, grip-wise, it feels like a 5D Mark IV. You know, or a 5D class camera. I'm going to pop the battery door cover off here so that I can rip the battery grip out of its package. So I put battery grips on all my cameras. I like the ergonomics. Let me say that again in case that got completely lost. I got over the packaging. I put battery grips on all my cameras. I like the ergonomics, so, you know, I know not everybody wants battery grips or wants to use a battery grip or whatever, but I find that it makes the package, you know, just the way I hold the camera and for my hand, it makes the package just that much better, more comfortable to use, etc. So, first observations, you know, I haven't powered it up yet, haven't really done anything with it yet. First observations are that, you know, it's kind of 5D sized. Of course, I expected that. It isn't that much smaller than a 5D Mark IV, which to some extent, actually, there's a level with the cooling issues or thermal management issues that have come up on the camera that it isn't that much smaller than a 5D Mark IV. It's lighter than a 5D Mark IV. Well, with the battery gap, actually, it doesn't even really feel that much lighter in the hand than my 5D Mark IVs. So it's smaller by a tiny bit, and in making it that tiny bit smaller, I feel like, you know, they could have just gone with the I feel like they could have just gone with the 5D Mark IV's design, or a 5D Mark IV sized body, and, you know, gone with that and done it that way and just made it a, like, you know, better cooled camera. I do have some qualms, so I'm gonna go into a lot more depth with this. I have to set the camera up before I even start trying to do things, and I'm not going to do that on camera. I am going to do my standard camera test series, and I'm going to walk through that and do that because I haven't done a video with that. So I'll show you the whole process I go through to dial in the settings that I'm going to use in Lightroom and how I get those settings and whatnot. But, you know, like I said, it's having it here, sitting in hand. You know, it's a camera. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it in some respects. There's some things that Canon has done here with the design that I am not terribly enthusiastic or enthralled with. Like, I don't know, yeah, it shows up pretty good on the overhead camera. The camera's off, and the LCD is still displaying that the camera is in AV mode. I don't... That's going to eat power. And I don't always have my cameras, like, I don't see a huge need for that. When I had a 1D Mark III, which had soft mode stuff, it didn't have a physical mode dial. You set that in software. I don't remember it displaying the mode all the time. It displayed the mode when the camera was on, but, you know, it didn't display it all the time. The other thing is, I'm not enthralled with this little top display. First of all, from a straight up, like, granted, I haven't used the camera yet, but first of all, from a straight up, having, you know, looked at what the display displays, I don't think it's as useful as the top display on a 5D Mark IV. And I feel like Canon went, you know, well, we can do this new kind of LCD. It's a, you know, it's a, I think it's an LCD. You know, we can have it display, you know, without being like a segmented display. Like, so the 5D Mark IV, the display is segmented, and this is, you know, like a dot matrix or a matrix LCD. You get nicer text out of it, certainly. But on the same token, I think there's stuff that I would like to see that I don't get on the, like, I have to go into the second screen, you know, so it's smaller. Right away, even in the light in the studio, I find it's a little harder to read than the displays on my 5D Mark IV. That may not be the case. Well, like turning the backlight on, which just inverts the thing to white or black text on white instead of white text on black. You know, maybe this is an OLED, and that's why they're using the darker fonts, because the darker font, or the darker native coloring, I'm not entirely sure, but that would cause this to be dimmer. or no, I don't think it's an OLED because if I cover it, it's definitely an LCD. There's some choices there from a user interface and usability perspective I don't particularly think Canon thought through real well. It's small, it's harder to read, and it doesn't serve as well or as strong of a purpose as the display on the top of, say, a 5D Mark IV or 1DX. And yeah, I know you could say, well, it's mirrorless, you got that in the viewfinder, you have it on the back screen, but the sort of the point of that top LCD in a lot of respects to me is quickly being able to see camera settings without having to look through the viewfinder or turn on the back screen or whatever. And yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. The secondary dials are, secondary dials. I don't, they definitely have gone for I feel like they've gone in some cases for like form over function. The three buttons, so on a 5D Mark IV, there's three buttons in the front of the LCD display that control the leftmost is ISO and flash exposure compensation. The middle one is drive mode and autofocus mode, and the rightmost is white balance and metering mode. And they're really easy, handy, accessible, hit the button, do the thing. And I know, like, this is one of those things, part of why I wanted to move to a mirrorless camera. I won't say as soon as Canon had something that was comparable to my 5D Mark IVs in terms of ergonomics and usability, but sooner rather than later, is there's a lot of stuff that I would say, this is the way I use a DSL, a Canon DSLR. It has these features and this functionality and in this orientation or organization. And I use it this way. And the R5 sort of changes things up substantially. There's a extra control dial. There's actually two extra control dials because if you have the control dial mount adapter or the any of the RF lenses, there's an extra control dial on the lens. And so that means that you have more dials, essentially. And so it's obvious that Canon has sort of decided that, well, if we're giving the users more dials, we don't need as many buttons so that you change things differently. And so for me, like, I don't think that's the greatest alternative in terms of a setup because it comes down to a lot of the things. Mirrorless doesn't preclude doing things that you did on a DSLR for photography. Metering is still a thing. Autofocus is still a thing. Autofocus modes are still a thing. Yeah, there's, I think, people out there who would love to think that, well, you can just, use the AI autofocus stuff and never have to do anything else and let the camera just take over for you. And I don't, as a photographer, really agree with that, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't think that way. I don't work that way. I don't feel the camera never has an understanding of the artistic vision that I'm going after. And so the camera will focus on what it's been trained or what the algorithms say it should focus on. It's not going to focus on what I want it to focus on unless those two things overlap. And they don't always overlap. And so for me, having the camera just running roughshod on its own automatically, instead of me being able to do what I want to do with it, I don't I don't see automation as this end all be all, like everything needs to be done through automation. To me, automation's there to help. It's there to make your job and life easier as a photographer, but it has to serve for me at least, it has to serve my or my intent as the photographer. So my creative vision is what the camera has to allow me to translate to or produce. And in some respects, having handled this and thought about it a little bit, it feels to me like there's a level where Canon has sort of decided people should be using the automation, which, you know, maybe makes sense if you're talking about an entry-level camera like an EOS R or an EOS RP. And, you know, I still say to this day, the RP is effectively a digital Rebel with a full-frame sensor and a mirrorless body, and the R is the equivalent of the 6D Mark II in digital, in mirrorless format. This is really the first professional grade in terms of the way it's set up and designed camera, and I'm not just saying from Canon mirrorless, and I'm not just saying that because it's an R5 or I've got one or whatever, because I was going to get an EOS R, and I looked at them and I looked at them and I looked at them, and I kept coming to the conclusion that it was a step backwards from my 5D Mark IV. It didn't give me the same set of features and capabilities. And, you know, this I felt basically did. I wasn't in it, I'm not in it for the like 8K video or whatever. I'm a still photographer, even though I shoot a lot of video now, but my primary focus is sort of on still photography. But like I said, it's at the same point, and I know there's a lot I can customize about how things get, you know, messed with and whatnot, but at the same point, well, it's interesting, and I will definitely be talking about this more because there's stuff that I can see here where by doing what they've done. So, for example, if I wake the camera up and I hit the MFN button, I can change the ISO, I can change the drive mode, I can change the autofocus mode, I can change the white balance, I can change, what is that, flash exposure composition and cycles, or compensation, and it cycles back to autofocus. And once I'm in that, I can use the dial around the mode to switch to whatever I want to switch to. And the neat thing is because it's using the MFN button in this new command dial, I don't know if that shows, there we go. Not used to working with an overhead camera. I can use the MFN button on the grip and make all the same changes with the dials on the grip instead of on the main camera. And, you know, this has been one of those things that I would say in the ergonomics of a 5D Mark IV is the grip disadvantages you because those three buttons that control all those primary settings on the 5D Mark IV, if you're shooting from a vertical grip, you have the disadvantage of, well, not having access to those three buttons. And so I've, for example, because I need to change the ISO relatively frequently, well, I won't say relatively frequently, I want easy access to changing the ISO. The little switch on the back of the 5D Mark IV that's used for, I think, normally autofocus point mode or something like that, I've switched to do ISO. So I can hit the button on the top, or I can use the switch on the back, which is replicated on the vertical grip. And so there's on one hand, there's using the button scroll through a menu type thing, there's a higher latency to things. There's a variable latency. So on a 5D Mark IV, any of the 6 functions that those 4 or the 3 top buttons control have the same latency. You hit the button, now there's a little more of a stretch to get to, say, the metering than it is to get to the ISO, but changing any of that, it's you hit the button, you turn the top or the rear dial. On this, you don't quite have, you have a higher amount of latency in terms of you hit the MFN button or, you know, whatever you program it to, and then you use the secondary dial around the mode to adjust the what you're changing, and then the main control command dial to change the setting. And it works. And the plus of that is that you have symmetric, you don't have a disadvantage to using the vertical grip. You have an advantage if you're using, or you have the same capabilities using either the vertical or the standard grip. But the flip side is if you're trying to get to something that's not ISO, which is sort of the default thing or the primary thing in that menu, then you have a increased amount of time as you're switching through to get to the other mode that you're trying to set or change. Now, fortunately, while I'm talking about this and I'm kind of making a deal out of it, on the same token, a lot of this stuff isn't something that you should really need to change in the heat of battle, so to speak. And the way the camera comes sort of out of the box is the primary command dial and the dial on the back of the camera do essentially the same thing as the same thing as they would on a 5D Mark IV. So I've got the camera in aperture priority mode here, and if I turn the front dial, if I had a lens on it, that would change the aperture. If I turn the dial on the back, again, if I had a lens on it, that changes the regular exposure compensation, and the mode dial here changes my ISO. So I can change all of those settings very easily. And of course, if I've got a lens with a command ring on it, I can change even more settings just turning the dial on the lens. So that makes things very effective. And from a shooting standpoint, like, this sort of eliminates a lot of the I need to go into those menus anyway, or I need to be quick in those menus anyway, because pretty much the only thing I would want to change rapidly is the ISO. That's the thing that when you're shooting and you notice that you need a half of a third of a stop more shutter speed or a stop more shutter speed, and you're already wide open, you can click the ISO up a stop and get your stop more shutter speed. And so having that on a dial does make that way faster than a button in a dial, regardless of which button and which dial. And again, it's symmetrical, so the ISO changes with the dial on the back. The secondary command dial you can reach with your thumb. It's a little bit more of a reach, I feel, because of where they put it compared to, say, a 5D Mark IV. It's not impossible or overly difficult. The joystick on the bottom is a little less accessible maybe than I would like it to be, but it's not horrible. Like I said, it's time to get started in playing with this, and I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to set this up off camera because I don't think we need to sit here and watch me stumble through the menus of a new camera and do all the setup. And I will have more on this video, or for this video, or this series of videos, because I think I'm going to just cut these all off in single chunks. So I will have more on the R5 as a practical first thing. So this is my first impressions. You saw me unbox it. This is kind of what I thought about the camera right out of the gate, and some of the first thoughts that ran through my mind. I will be back talking about the R5 an awful lot as I look through and mess with it and get more familiar with it, and I will show you some of the process that I use to set up a camera like the R5, but actually really any camera that I set up. And I'll have some videos shot with it. I'll probably be shooting videos more with it than I shoot stills with it right off the bat, but there you go. First impressions of Canon's EOS R5, their first professional grade mirrorless camera. So made it this far. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button if you found this interesting. Consider subscribing if you'd like to be notified of more content around the R5 and photography in general. Smash the bell if you want notifications. Otherwise, I don't know why I'm telling you this. You're a YouTuber. If you're watching this on YouTube, you should know all this stuff, or you probably know all this stuff, and this is all just the kind of stupid, redundant stuff they tell content creators to tell people because, that's what they tell us to do. But anyway, thanks for watching. and I will see you next time.